The NBA playoffs are here, and I'm getting my bets in on FanDuel. Talk to me, Chuck GPT. What do you know?
All sorts of interesting stuff, even Charles Barkley's greatest fear.
Hey, nobody needs to know that.
New customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
21 plus and present in select states. Must be first online real money wager. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
The Red Apple Media Podcast Network presents This is Protecting America. Now, here's Emmy-winning journalist Rita Cosby.
And welcome to another edition of Protecting America. I'm Rita Cosby. Well, Chinese nationals, mostly military-age men, are crossing our southern border at a record pace. And China keeps coming up in investigations surrounding President Joe Biden and especially his family, like Hunter Biden. Well, joining us now to discuss China's calculating influence and attempts to infiltrate our country in so many different arenas is Peter Schweizer. He is the president of the Government Accountability Institute. He is also a big best-selling author, and he has just released another big blockbuster, a new book, which is sure to be another big bestseller. It is called Blood Money: Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. Peter, great to have you here.
Always great to be with you, Rita. Thanks so much.
Peter, what role does China play with deadly fentanyl crossing our border?
They play the central role. I would say that the Mexican cartels are actually the junior partner. And the evidence is clear. I mean, look, a lot of people know, Rita, that the precursor chemicals for fentanyl come from China. But that's just the beginning. Those precursors come to a port in Mexico, 90% of them, a port called Manzanillo. The port in Manzanillo, Mexico, is not actually run by a Mexican company or American company. It's run by a Chinese company, Hutchison, that's very close to the regime. Those precursors come in, they're smuggled in, then they are sent to a town in northern Mexico where 2,000 Chinese nationals, according to leaked government documents that I quote in the book, 2,000 Chinese nationals help the Mexican cartels turn the precursors into actually fentanyl. Now what they need to do is put them into pills, because most people that are taking fentanyl don't know they're taking fentanyl. They think they're taking a Vicodin or a Adderall. So they have to have pill presses, very precise pill presses. Well, they get those pill presses from China. And according to our Department of Homeland Security and reports that I quote, the Chinese sell those pill presses to the cartels at cost. In other words, they're not looking to gouge them or make money. So now they've made these pills. They bring them into the United States, and these criminal gangs need what? They need secure communication devices because they don't want American law enforcement listening to them. What do the Mexican cartels use? They use Chinese apps and Chinese communication devices because they know that they will not share those encryptions with U.S. and law enforcement. And then the final step is the actual laundering of the money. It used to be that the drug cartels laundered their money in Latin American banks. They launder them in Chinese state-owned banks. So this is a Chinese-run operation. It's a replay of the opium wars of more than a century ago, and it's highly successful because fentanyl, again, people that die from it don't know that they're taking it. Fentanyl now is the leading cause of death for people under 45 in the United States. It's an efficient, potent weapon that is aimed directly at us.
You know, we hear the numbers, too, Peter Schweizer, anywhere from, about 100,000 people a year? That's stunning in America alone.
Yeah, 100,000, and it's young people. And, to put that in perspective, that's more than the casualties we suffered in the Korean War and the Vietnam War every single year. This has been happening, and the rates continue to climb. And again, it affects young people, and it's the equivalent of a jetliner being shot down every single day in the United States, every single day, 365 days a year. Those are the numbers we're talking about. And yet we have so many political leaders, Rita, that will not talk about this. Some of them don't want to have to make tough decisions, but some of them, frankly, are compromised because they have financial ties or they have entanglements or they have relationships with people that are actually involved in Chinese organized criminal networks that are involved in the drug trade.
And I have so many questions for you. First off, you talked about some of the places where they're not making the money on the fentanyl. Then what's the purpose? Is the ultimate goal money elsewhere, or is the goal destroy America?
Yeah, so there are multiple goals here. The cartels, of course, primarily about making money, but the Chinese chemists and the Chinese that are involved in this operation, their motive is primarily not money, although they're being paid by the cartels. Their motive is to kill Americans. That is the explicit goal. You know, people will say to me, I don't understand why people die of fentanyl overdoses. It's not like the cartels want to kill their customers. That's right. But the chemists that are mixing this stuff together are actually Chinese nationals, according to Homeland Security. They're not interested in customers. They're interested in a larger objective, which is to actually kill Americans. And, you know, look, our response has been to, you know, and Joe Biden touts that, we impose sanctions on Chinese officials that are caught being involved in the fentanyl trade. I'll tell you what the Chinese think about that. There's a gentleman named Juan who was sanctioned by our government for being caught being involved in the fentanyl trade. He's part of a consultative body with the CCP. After he was named and sanctioned by our federal government, he was actually given an award by the Chinese Communist Party, and he gave a fiery speech where he said he was happy and proud of what he was doing to help China in its competition with the United States. So that's what they think about the hardline position that Joe Biden touts as his position on how to deal with fentanyl.
Wow. So is there any doubt in your mind that after all this research that the Chinese government is not completely, obviously, organizing this, condoning it, and has their thumb on this every step of the way?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, if you look, I talk about President Xi in the book as well. You look at his personal experience. His father, who he adores, President Xi actually built a large mausoleum to his father. One of his most famous acts was as a 14-year-old boy, he tried to poison his teacher because his teacher was not sufficiently revolutionary. So Xi finds that sort of approach admirable. And Xi really cut his political teeth in China in Fujian province, which is a coastal province, which happens to be the center point, the focal point of the triads, which is Chinese organized crime. And when he was a local CCP official there, he had a reputation even then in the United States for harboring and covering up and protecting Chinese gangsters who had committed crime in the United States and, of course, would go back to Fujian province and walk around freely and pal around with Xi and his friends. So, you know, Xi is not your conventional leader. He's not even your conventional communist leader. He's a guy that sees these criminal networks, things like the drug trade, as potent weapons to be used against the United States. And he admires the fact that his father tried to poison his teacher when he was 14 years old.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Wow, that is wild history. Now, you mentioned it's sort of, a port community. On the flip side, you mentioned also Mexico, that as part of the triad, Manzanillo. Isn't Manzanillo like a resort town in Mexico, like where people think they're going for a nice holiday? Obviously, there's a lot more going on there.
Yeah, it's a very active port. If you look at most of the Western ports in Mexico, they are run by Chinese companies, the international terminals. And so they basically control what goes in and out. And yes, the DEA and our federal government says that 90% of the precursor chemicals that the cartels get come through the port in Manzanillo. Everybody wonders, why can't we stop this? One of the reasons we can't stop it is a Chinese company is actually running that terminal where this stuff is coming in.
That is wild. So they have control on so many different levels. So then let's talk about also the fact that all of these migrants are now coming through this huge slew of Chinese nationals, many of them coming through Port of San Diego, but also other locations, the crossing there. We've seen it's an enormous increase. Why are we seeing especially middle-aged men showing up, many of them well-dressed, paying big money sometimes also to the cartels to come across? What are they doing?
No, that's a great question. And, you want to think that some of these maybe just are fleeing communism. They're fleeing China. That may be some of them. But you have to look at the track record here. And China's track record is to sow chaos in the United States. So, and I talk about in the book Blood Money, in 2020, when there were riots, taking place in the United States, many of the groups that were leading those riots have links to the CCP. I talk about them in the book. But there was a very troubling incident that occurred in Houston. Turns out that the Chinese sent in a team of Chinese-trained military specialists to their consulate in Houston. And at the consulate in Houston, they were trying to stir up more violent protests in the country. They were putting up content on TikTok. They were going on social media, putting out how-to videos and spreading them around on how to lead and disruptive violent protests in the United States. We got wind of it. That was shut down. Those guys were expelled and had to leave the country. But the point is, this is their history. This is what they do. So the notion that they would send people across the border to infiltrate the United States is not a leap at all. From their perspective, they went through the embassy with military personnel as diplomats. They were caught. They were expelled. Let's try a different approach, a different technique, and that is to actually bring them across the border illegally into the country. And that, I think, is the real fear.
Is that for military purposes? Is it for more protests? Is it for more fentanyl? Or is it all of the above?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, look, you have to see all of this in combination. China has something they call disintegration warfare. There was a book published in 2010 by senior military officers, and it's been embraced by the Chinese government. And what it basically says is we defeat the United States not by fighting it, but by weakening it, by causing chaos in the United States. So the groups that led a lot of the violent protests in 2020 are the same groups that are leading violent protests today, those pro-Hamas rallies. People say, oh, those must be Palestinians. Actually, they're not. They're groups like FRSO and PSL. These are groups that have deep, abiding ties to China. There's a famous history that's been written on the left by Mitch Albom. He says that FRSO takes its marching orders from Beijing. This is a guy on the left. There's plenty of examples of communication between the two. These groups plead allegiance to China, and they are the ones that take what might have been in 2020 a simple protest about race relations and make it violent and make it radical. And these are the same groups that are now leading the Hamas protests in the United States. Again, somebody shows up, maybe they're concerned about, can't we do something to try to, bring peace to the world? And now suddenly you've got violent protesters who are storming buildings and attacking police officers. These are the types of organizations with close Beijing ties that are sowing that kind of chaos. That fits in well with the fentanyl and the other things that they're doing as well.
Is there evidence, too, that it's also financially they're supporting them, not just stirring up the emotions?
Oh, absolutely. So there's a gentleman I talk about in the book named Roy Singham. He's an American who built a company called ThoughtWorks. He was a big contractor for Huawei, which is a Chinese state-linked military contractor. He sold his business to a private equity firm that's partly owned by the Chinese government, and it made him a billionaire. And what did he do? He moved to China. And in China, he is friends with CCP officials. He gets invited to CCP events. He toes the party line. And he also has poured $160 million into radical causes in the United States, including these protest groups. His organization that doles out this money is headed by two people who are members of this radical violent protest organization called PSL. There's also other funding that comes in. We've seen, Rita, over the last 4 or 5 years, the sort of trans movement has emerged. And you kind of wonder, where did this come from? Well, where it came from partly is two billionaires based in China are some of the biggest funders of the trans movement in the United States. One of them is Roy Singham, who I was just talking about. The other one is a gentleman named Joe Tsai, who was the co-founder of Alibaba. And he has pledged and put tens of millions of dollars into trans rights-related causes. He's not trans rights himself. But here's the real troubling part about this, Rita. Both of these gentlemen who are plowing this money into this movement in the United States do not advocate for those same positions in China itself.
Oh, that's interesting. So, yeah, you wonder what are they doing with it here, right?
Exactly. And I do think it's one of those divisive issues that really divides the country and sows chaos, and it fits very, very consistently with this disintegration warfare doctrine that they are carrying out.
What about also Chinese buying up farmland? We hear about that near U.S. military bases.
Yes. China purchased a lot of farmland in the United States. They also have gone in heavily into the illegal marijuana business. This is another thing that was kind of shocking. And this is not the sort of mild marijuana that college students in the 90s were smoking. This is the really, really potent stuff. And, of course, marijuana can often be tainted with fentanyl. But in the state of Maine alone, there are 300 known illegal marijuana growth operations that are carried out being run by Chinese nationals with financial support from mainland China. And it's a money-making venture, but again, it's also a social chaos play. There are a bunch of these operations in California. The sheriffs you talk to out there, I quote them in the book, say 95% of the illegal marijuana grows in California are being run by Chinese nationals with funding from China itself. They're finding them in Oklahoma. So, they're buying land and they're using it for these illicit activities that's very damaging to America.
So the big question is, why haven't our officials cracked down? And you hear China's name mentioned quite a bit, especially tied to the Biden family.
Yeah, you do. And it's not just Chinese money. It's money that is, connected one step removed from a lot of this activity. So, for example, we talked about Chinese organized crime helping the fentanyl trade in Mexico. There's a Chinese criminal organization called UBG. One of the heads of it is a guy named White Wolf, and they're the ones that made the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico the kings of fentanyl. Well, it turns out White Wolf had a business partner, and that business partner sent $5 million to the Bidens. So the first family of the United States is literally one step removed from the Chinese organized criminal syndicates that are poisoning America. And that's, I think, one of the reasons Joe Biden does not want to have this conversation about China's involvement with fentanyl and want to bring any attention to it.
Also, Hunter Biden, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, didn't he receive apparently a diamond? Weren't there reports he got a diamond from China? And he also testified, I remember in one of the earlier hearings, that he received money from China, even though Joe Biden in the debate said nobody in his family did.
Yeah, he's received two diamonds from
well,
Chinese
two diamonds
officials.
are better than one diamond, right?
Exactly. And they're not just a girl's best friend, right? They are also a money launderer's best friend because it's very hard to trace diamonds. No, the Bidens have received tens of millions of dollars from Chinese interests. I've documented that in my previous books. What I show in this book is that some of that money comes from businessmen that have these ties to Chinese organized crime. And I think that takes it to it's no longer just a political influence operation anymore. It's actually, perilously close to being involved with organized crime figures in China that are, again, fueling the fentanyl epidemic in the United States.
Where do you think the investigation, the impeachment inquiry is going? Because obviously China's name keeps coming up and a lot of these Chinese officials, some of that you've mentioned.
Yeah, I think they've done a very, very good job. I think that the evidence is clear. Joe Biden has lied about the fact that his family received money from these entities. He's lied about the fact that he didn't know about it. And he's lied about the fact that he didn't participate. We know he met with business partners of Hunter Biden, and he aided and abetted in this activity. And look, if we let this stand, Rita, it's going to be a free-for-all. You can now have the Secretary of Defense can have his adult kids take money from Russia, take money from China, because the Biden rule says it's okay. There's nothing wrong with their family members running these kinds of operations. There was no legitimate business. Hunter Biden and James Biden, the president's brother, performed no services. They provided no products. This was simply a pay-influence operation, and that's what's so scary about it.
Also, there is that triad, too. And I should say, even beyond the triad, you've got China, you've got Russia, as you just brought up, Iran, also North Korea. It's like a bad actors group. China is central to all of this.
Yes. China is central to all of this. They are chief rival on the global stage. Joe Biden doesn't want to say that. Joe Biden says he wants a strong and powerful China. He believes that they are his friend. And I think this is where money buys friendship. Money buys these kinds of relationships. And this is the reason our founding fathers warned about foreign influences. They warned about having foreign governments paying and giving gifts to our leaders because they knew that it would have a dramatic effect on the policies that our leaders are supposed to carry out.
And finally, too, where do you see this going? Do you see any change in policy with this investigation? You think they'll blow the lid where maybe there'll be some sort of reaction? Or do you think that there's too many dirty hands in the mix?
Well, there are a lot of dirty hands in the mix. What I take encouragement from, Rita, is if you look at all the polls, Harvard Harris, ABC News, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, when they ask voters the question, do you believe that Joe Biden engaged in illegal or highly unethical behavior in helping his family business? And in the high 60s, people say yes. 65, 68% consistently. That means that everybody other than diehard Democrats recognize and believe that what Joe Biden did. And now the question is, are they prepared to reject that? And I believe a lot of them will. So I think this is going to be an important issue if Joe Biden is in fact the candidate. I think this is going to be an important issue because corruption is still one of those issues that I think a lot of voters, particularly independents, really care about.
Yeah, I agree. And I think people are much more attuned as to China's role, whether it's in the border and a whole bunch of other areas. By the way, I was about to let you go, but I want to have you talk about one other thing about also the issue that they're doing with the guns, smuggling in what are these Glock switches, because that is so fascinating, too.
Yeah, in 2018, they began smuggling in by the thousands these Glock switches. It's a highly illegal device in the United States. You can only get it with a very special permit. You put this little device in a Glock handgun, it turns a Glock handgun into a machine gun. And they have been smuggling them into the United States. As our customs people who do such a great job have learned to detect these sent through the mail, they now are joining forces. The Chinese businesses are joining forces with the cartels. They're producing them in Mexico, and they're smuggling them across our open borders. This is why we now have 1930s type machine gun fire happening in American cities all across the country. It's an enormous problem, and they specifically targeted these devices to organized crime figures and to drug cartels operating in the United States.
Wow. Peter, you always are such a great investigative journalist. You always uncover such unbelievable stuff. It is so powerful and so important. Everybody be sure to subscribe and share to this podcast. And Peter Schweizer, thank you for everything you do. Congrats on this powerful, revealing, and boy, very timely new book, Blood Money. I encourage everybody to go out and get it. It is eye-opening from beginning to end about the role that China is playing, that some we see and a lot we don't see. And boy, I think so many of us have learned so much from this podcast with you. This is Blockbuster. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thanks for having me, Rita.
And everybody, I'll be back soon with another great edition of Protecting America. And of course, you can catch me every weeknight, 10 p.m. to midnight on the legendary WABC Radio. This is Rita Cosby, and thanks for all you do to protect America.
Hello, folks. Larry Kudlow here. Pay attention, because China is leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II. One that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.